So today we have a new interview with Naoki Hamaguchi, the director of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, where he talks about the process of developing AAA titles, specifically with Rebirth, including things like localization, core concepts for the game, and even the meaning of winning and being nominated for game awards. So if any of that sounds cool to you, you can click the like button, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments down below. So this interview comes to us from Sony.com under their Voices of Creativity section of the website, where they spoke to Hamaguchi-san to talk about Rebirth, crafting this game, and even that big win at the Grand Awards held last year. So starting off first, Hamaguchi talks about what it's like to receive an award like this and what it means to him and the team. He would go on to say, "Since this is only the second part of the trilogy and the story is still unfolding, I wasn't sure how it would be received. But having our creative challenges recognized in this way is incredibly rewarding as a creator. It's also a huge source of motivation for the development team as we move forward with the next title, making this award more meaningful. We develop games with the goal of delivering a top-tier AAA experience, not just for players in Japan, but for gamers around the world. We strive to create at a level that stands alongside the year's most outstanding titles. From that perspective, being nominated for or winning an award is proof that our work has been recognized and appreciated. It's a meaningful validation of everything we put into the game throughout the year." And I'm really glad that he vocalized that, because I've been vocalizing the same thing for months now, especially coming off of the really big award season for video games. There's always conversations happening about what game should win Game of the Year, what should be nominated, what should have won, what ended up winning. Being nominated or even winning these awards is a really big deal for said games because it puts a massive spotlight on these titles, specifically with 7 Rebirth, which had a little bit of a slow start when it came to sales, but it seemed to have legs and it just kind of stayed steady throughout the year. And then we got to award season and we saw all these people really kind of echoing how wonderful Rebirth was. And you look at the review scores and it was like 110 perfect review scores. I think as of right now, since the PC release, it's even ballooned up higher than that. But what's really nice about this whole award season is even though Rebirth didn't win Game of the Year at the Game Awards and some other outlets, it was nominated for a ton of awards at a ton of different shows, which puts so much spotlight on it. And that nomination alone just allows for so much recognition for that game, for the people involved making it. And it lets people know, like, yeah, this is a really good game. It has really great music or storytelling or direction, or it's like so good we wanted to nominate it for Best Game of the Year. You should check it out. So it really just ends up validating all of that hard work that everyone puts into making the game. So yeah, these nominations are really big. Winning is big, but again, I think just being nominated is a big win in itself. Up next, they ask Hamaguchi what's it like making games for a global scale now instead of just the Japanese audience, especially when it comes to something like Remake and Rebirth. Hamaguchi goes on to say, "Back when the original Final Fantasy VII was released, it was primarily created for the Japanese market, and its global reach expanded as it gained recognition. But today, rather than first prioritizing the Japanese market and letting the game's reach grow organically, we now create with a global audience in mind from the very start. In that sense, we are in a completely different era. As Japanese creators, we naturally develop the game in Japanese first before translating it into other languages. During localization, we sometimes adjust phrasing to better fit different cultural contexts. However, this is a delicate process. Players who have a deep respect and strong feelings for the original work often notice even the slightest differences between the Japanese and translated versions and ask why certain changes were made. It's a challenge we constantly navigate in game creation." I'm also really happy he brought this up because localization is a very big thing, and I really feel like it's come such a long way from even the OG FF7, FF6, those types of games. And what a lot of people probably don't realize, localization entails a lot. It's not just, okay, let's translate Japanese text to English text. You have to find the right way to translate these words. You have to make sure you keep the nuance in the meaning, the context essentially of what's being said by each character, how they're saying it, what the overall scene is. And that can be really difficult, especially since all of our cultures are so different and we express ourselves differently in how we speak and how we, use certain colloquialisms. And I think a really good example of that is a scene that happens towards the end of Rebirth, which, spoiler alert, if you haven't finished Rebirth, I'm going to talk about a pretty big plot point, so you've been warned. But it's the death/not death of Aerith scene, where Cloud is holding Aerith on the ground and he's about to leave to fight Jenova, and he looks at her, and in the Japanese version, he says to Aerith, "Wait for me." In the English version, he says, "I got this." Now, for me personally, on the surface level, I don't feel like there's that drastic of a difference between what's being communicated in that scene, because either way, Cloud is telling Aerith, "I'm gonna go handle this thing, I'll be back." So I feel like it effectively gets that point across. And if you look at the differences in language, I don't speak Japanese and I'm not part of the culture, but maybe in the culture of Japan and in that language, it would make sense for that version of Cloud to say, "Wait for me." But in the English version, the way we see Cloud talking and communicating with people, the type of slang that he uses throughout the game, it makes sense for that English version of Cloud to say, "I got this." Because I feel like in the culture of America, that's how a lot of us would talk. Like if you're gonna go do something or handle something, you'd be like, "I got this." It's just like a very Americanized kind of way to say you're gonna handle something. I think another good example of that is the scene where you're climbing Mount Corel and Aerith is experiencing that runner's high when she's climbing the mountain, and Red 13 is kind of feeding into it and kind of coddling her and reinforcing this really kind of high behavior, which is really funny. And Cloud just has a point where he goes, "The hell you doing, Red?" Like the way Cody delivers that line is a way that someone who, English is their first language, they grew up in America, would say, like, "What are you doing?" So again, I feel like it makes sense between the two different versions of Cloud in particular on how these characters speak, and especially when it comes to the localization. However, there are some people that look at the Japanese version of that scene with Aerith, where Cloud tells her, "Wait for me," and they look much, much deeper into the context of what Cloud is saying. And to them, "Wait for me" isn't just, "I'm gonna go handle something and I'll be back." For them, it means a lot more to the story and maybe like the context of like the overarching story between Cloud and Aerith and their relationship. For me personally, I don't look that far into it. I'm looking at that section from more of like a surface point where, again, I feel like they get the point across effectively. It's just told in a way that is different based on the culture. But that's just kind of how I see it. So sometimes things aren't translated one-to-one from Japanese to English because you don't have a one-to-one alternative. And Square Enix really changed up their localization game. They look very closely at this stuff now. So if something ends up a certain way in the English version, chances are the developers were okay with that because they could probably, get their point across a different way later in the game or through a different conversation. So it takes a lot of work. And even, people like Nomura and Nojima-san have talked about this in the past, saying like, yeah, before Final Fantasy VII, they didn't pay a lot of attention to localization, which became a really big issue specifically for a game like Final Fantasy VII, where in the later years, both of them would hear, a lot of valid criticism when it came to how certain characters were written or portrayed, especially when it came to things like stereotypes. And Nojima-san in particular, he seems like a very introspective individual, very maybe more on the sensitive side, which I can completely understand, but he seems to be someone who wants to learn from past mistakes or what he felt like he could have done better. And he brought that up in an interview with Polygon, saying that, yeah, after he heard valid complaints from a lot of fans, he's like, I started to think about this stuff a little differently in terms of how he would implement them into his future games. And for Nomura, from that same Polygon interview, he said he was kind of shocked at first with some of the criticisms they received from Barrett, but then when they analyzed the whole situation, they felt like a lot of it really just came down to localization issues and how the translations just weren't that good. Because back then, they would make the game, do it in Japanese, and then just hand it off to the localization team and just let them do what they thought was best for the English version of that game. But by doing that, it led to the localization team adding things and portraying things specific ways that were never the developer's intention. So because of those experiences, Nomura said now they work very, very closely with the localization teams to ensure that they're getting the proper translations across. And again, that's not just through text, it's really through cultural stuff as well. A scene I really like to cite is from Final Fantasy VII Remake with the Honeybee Inn stuff. In the original game, it was kind of weird the way that stuff was handled, and a lot of it I think comes down to localization, but you look at how they handle it in Remake, I feel like it's done very respectfully. It's still funny and silly and goofy, but it never punches down on specific groups of people. It's actually a very beautiful scene once everything ends, with Andrea saying to Cloud, just be who you are, man. Don't be afraid to be your true self. And then on the flip side of that, something less serious and a little goofier, We have Final Fantasy VIII with the character of Zell, who in the American version loves hot dogs. He's obsessed with them. There's even a section in the game where their garden gets attacked and you can pick one of the options for Squall saying like protect the hot dogs at all cost. Well, turns out in the original Japanese version, it wasn't hot dogs he was obsessed with. He was obsessed with these meat sauce flavored buns. But in American culture, we don't have said meat sauce flavored buns, so the closest thing to it would have been hot dogs. So again, you don't have a direct comparison all the time, so sometimes you just have to kind of pull what's closest to whatever culture is being represented in the, that version of the game, specifically with us, the American version. Up next, Hamaguchi talks about creating a concept for their game and how it can lead the development team to all be on the same page. And Hamaguchi would go on to talk about how they wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page because the teams creating these games are massive. Whether it's something like AAA titles or even the film industry, you've got sometimes 200-300 people working on any given project at a time. So it's incredibly important to create one unifying concept from the very beginning of your project so that way everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, what they're striving for, because that leads to more cohesion and efficiency when producing these games. He then continues on by saying, to achieve this, my approach is to communicate a simple concept to the team, swiftly turning it into a framework, and then focusing on refining and developing it further. For Rebirth, we chose bonds as one of the central themes. Upon reviewing Kazushige Nojima's script, I was struck by the meticulous attention given to the characters' relationships. Given that the story experience centers around these bonds, I made it clear to the team that every aspect of the game, from the narrative to the battle systems, should be designed with this concept in mind. During the first year, our focus was on establishing the game's core structure. At this stage, assets and graphics don't need to be fully refined. The key was to create a rough but playable experience that allowed the team to understand how the game's connected, the elements involved, and how the story would unfold, like which quests might emerge at certain points and what minigames could be introduced. What mattered most was ensuring the team grasped the overall flow of the game. Once the structure was established, the process of refining and developing it naturally fell into place. And, covering these interviews and learning more about Hamaguchi, he seems like someone who is a very good leader, very analytical. He also approaches things from a much more realistic perspective when thinking about certain concepts. And in previous interviews, he's talked about working through the pandemic era and how sometimes everything had to be done remotely, but they always made sure to check in with everyone on the team. So I think they had like these 3-month intervals where they would just get everyone together, everyone would show off their work, what they were doing, what they were having issues with, and they would just work together to try and hammer out any issues or just be like, yeah, this is really, really good. This is what we want. Keep working. But again, stressing that idea of bonds that Nojima created for the story, everything again just is organically coming out of the word bonds for this game. And it's kind of like, I think maybe like writing a book, maybe writing a song, maybe even writing an article or doing like a YouTube video. You have your core concept that is your guiding light for everything that's going to be in that project. And that really does kind of create a really nice outline for you to keep you on track so you don't stray too far, because people like me, I go on tangents. I probably have ADD and don't even realize it. But when I can establish a core concept of a video, that allows me to just stay as focused as possible, and it makes the process easier. And again, that whole idea of taking the narrative, the core concept of what Rebirth is, which is bonds, and building all of that into the story, into the characters, how they interact with one another, the conversations they have, and how they even work together in battle. I love that stuff so much, and to me, there's probably a number of games you could list out there that have great writing, great acting, and character moments, but to me, Rebirth is one of the best, if not the best, because it's all organically done. As the characters grow in the story, they grow also in the battles. Their personalities are put on display, especially within the battle mechanics and the synergy skills and abilities. And as for the characters themselves, again, I feel like they're so well written and fleshed out and performed. And they don't just feel like standard, like anime or RPG characters. They feel like genuine characters who actually have pasts. They've got trauma. They talk to each other like human beings would talk to one another. It's all really, really well done. And it makes me curious, what's going to be the theme of Remake Part 3? Will it be loss? Accepting loss? Who knows? But whatever it is, it's probably going to be ingrained into the game's gameplay, not just story stuff, which is pretty cool. And then just to hit on that last part there where they talk about creating a build where not everything is super fleshed out in terms of visuals, but it's a playable build meant to just kind of be like, okay, this is what we're going to have here. We're going to have this quest pop up. We're going to do this minigame. This is where the team currently is right now with 7 Remake. Hamaguchi said this a few months ago about how they now have a playable build of Part 3 that's up and running, and it's allowing them to now build out the rest of the game. So that's really exciting. And again, you look at, I can't really sing the guy's praises enough, but as a developer, he just clearly knows what he's doing. Hamaguchi seems to be a really good fit for that leadership position, and clearly he knows how to structure his development teams to ensure to get the best out of everyone, to avoid as many errors as possible, and to ensure that everyone is being productive, working together, and working efficiently, hopefully without things like crunch. So the guy knows what he's doing, and I fully believe Square Enix is going to either give him a mainline Final Fantasy in the future or allow him to create a new IP. He just seems to know how to do these things efficiently. Or maybe I'll get lucky and Hamaguchi will revive the Bouncer, which I loved as a kid. I know the game itself wasn't always well received and it wasn't super popular, but I've always wanted a sequel to that game, or a remake or a remaster. I'm like one of 2 people on the planet that genuinely still loves the Bouncer, the other being Tiffany Lockhart. I know she's a massive fan of the Bouncer, like a genuine fan. Maybe the 2 of us will get our Bouncer sequel or remake one day. I can hope. Up next, Hamaguchi talks about something that is super controversial within the Final Fantasy VII community, and that is remakes. What changes do you make? What stays the same? How do you guys figure out what to do? Hamaguchi goes on to say, we approach this remake with 2 key principles in mind. First, we respect the original while enhancing it with details that couldn't be fully depicted at the time. By leveraging modern hardware and graphics, we create moments that feel fresh and exciting, not by altering the game itself, but by revealing new layers of depth. Our goal is to give players a sense of discovery, as if they're seeing familiar moments in a whole new light. He then goes on to explain things on smaller scale, like the fact that Red 13 now rides a chocobo. That may have been something that we thought about when we were younger. Like, okay, we only really see Cloud on chocobos, but what would it be like if the rest of the party was riding a chocobo, specifically Red 13? Well, in the remake, you can do that now. Even something like Barrett and Aerith doing a combo attack where they pull out sunglasses and put them on and then attack in devastating fashion. Stuff like that. But then he goes on to talk about some of the bigger, broader aspects, especially in regards to narrative, like introducing the Whispers and expanding the role of Zack. That stuff was deliberately done as new elements to kind of help out with the game's structure, because again, this is a trilogy and you can't just put everything all in one game. So you have to be kind of conscious about how you introduce the new stuff like those Whispers, expanding on Zack. So it's more like supplementary, I guess, to a degree in some aspects, although it is much more important. And that's something that Hamaguchi has echoed in the past, is that they want to make sure that 7 Remake and Rebirth are similar games, but they're not too similar to the point where it just feels like you're playing the same game over again and it becomes super repetitive. And when your game is super repetitive, you can easily lose players. So expect Part 3 to be kind of similar to Rebirth, but to introduce new mechanics, new minigames, again, new exploration techniques. So it should feel like a brand new standalone experience that does have echoes of what came before it. And again, I sound like a broken record because I've said this so many times. I love how they're handling all of this stuff in the remake trilogy. And again, there's a lot of people out there that do not like the remake trilogy. They don't like the story changes. They don't like things being fleshed out more. They don't like how, the Whispers are being introduced, how Zack's been expanded. They feel like they don't like it's not even a multiverse thing technically, but they still call it a multiverse thing. They're not big on that type of storytelling. But for me, I love it because again, they're doing what I think is really, really difficult in the sense that they're still keeping these games true to the original, because again, those experiences that for me personally, I had as a kid playing the original FF7, I'm having again as an adult, but I'm seeing it in a different way. So it's like I'm seeing things happen and it's like, oh, I remember this from the original game and now it's playing out in the remake, but it's slightly different, but it's still kind of giving me the same experience and feelings that I had when I experienced it the first time as a kid. But I also just love how they flesh things out more and how they're expanding the characters, the worlds, all of the lore, again, bonds, which is so important. But they're also doing what I think is really difficult, and they're taking aspects of the compilation, which for me personally, I know there's a lot of people out there that genuinely, wholeheartedly love the compilation. They think it's amazing. For me personally, I had some issues with it. I thought it was kind of messy and all over the place. Wasn't a big fan of things like Dirge, but there were aspects that I really appreciated, like Advent Children. And for them to take aspects of Crisis Core, Dirge, Advent Children, and kind of incorporate them into the remake trilogy in a way that works, in a way where it's written better and it doesn't overshadow the original story they told from FF7, I think is really well done. And it's not easy to do that stuff. And again, whenever you make any type of change to something that people love so much, you're gonna have a split audience. The people like me who really love it, there might be people in the middle who are like, I like this, but I don't really care for that. And then you've got the people on the other end of the spectrum who are like, this sucks. It's garbage. I don't like it. And my feelings are right and yours are wrong. Because I've had people like that show up on the channel. And again, I've said this before, if you don't like the remake trilogy, totally fine. I expected not everyone was gonna like it, and I can understand why people don't like it. But there are some people out there who are like, I don't like the game, therefore my feelings are objective, therefore the game itself is bad, and if you like it, you're a dummy. That stuff I don't get down with. I think it's silly. Now, before moving on to the next part, I do want to put a photo in this video, and this is a photo of Hamaguchi-san at his workstation, or as some people would call it, a battle station. This dude has at least 5, possibly 6 monitors on his desk at any given time. I assume there's a 6th one we just can't see on the left side of the frame. This dude is juggling so much. He's got like different, what looks like maybe Excel spreadsheets open. He's got the game open. He's got coding open. He's probably communicating with people on the dev team. That is a lot to keep track of. I'm overwhelmed just by looking at it. But again, he seems to be someone that really thrives in that type of situation, and it doesn't really seem to bog him down. He, again, is very analytical, looks at this stuff in a way where he kind of just organizes it properly in his brain and then distributes it to the rest of the team. So he's clearly someone built different and built for this kind of work. And now to end the video, we have some words from Hamaguchi on what voice drives him to keep creating. He goes on to say, I see games as a comprehensive form of entertainment, a collaborative art where no single creator defines the entire work. That's what makes it so exciting. The process of bringing together the diverse talents of incredible creators, blending our unique artistic voices into a single experience is what I love most. But for that synergy to happen, I need to bring my own creativity to the table with full force. I love the process of creators pushing each other, honing our craft together, and shaping something great. That's where the true joy of creation lies. To be honest, when I first joined Square Enix, I didn't set out to become a director. I started out as an engineer and remained focused on programming for years. I was the lead programmer on the Final Fantasy XIII series, but even then, it wasn't so much about wanting to be a programmer. It was more about asking myself where I could perform at my best, and programming was the answer. From the start, my approach wasn't about creating something purely from my own creativity, but about how I could contribute. In the end, I think what drives me most is my love for creating as a team. And that right there, I think just perfectly encapsulates, again, why Hamaguchi-san is such a good leader, is because he's a team player. He started off as a programmer, just wanting to offer the best he possibly could from what he felt he was the best at. And because he's able to view things like that and view his own strengths and potentially weaknesses, I think that makes him really good at managing a team and realizing, okay, these people over here are really, really good at this, and these people over here are really, really good at that. So we're gonna put them over there, we're gonna let them bring their own creative ideas, and then he's just gonna manage everything. And while I'm sure there are still some really strict requirements for the developers, again, Hamaguchi-san seems to be pretty comfortable in the position that he's in of leading a team, because he is a team player, and what's most important to him is that this is a team project. It's not just him promoting the game and taking credit for everything. He realizes everyone is so important to crafting an incredible experience. And that, I think, is super valuable to have in a leadership position. So again, I'm just so stoked with this remake trilogy. I loved Remake, I loved Rebirth. I cannot wait to see what they're gonna do with Part 3, and I'm crossing my fingers that maybe in the summer we'll get a little bit more of a tease into what they're gonna be doing with Part 3. Maybe we'll get a trailer, maybe they'll reveal the name of what Part 3 is going to be. Maybe it's Return, maybe it's Retold, maybe it's Revengeance. Nobody knows, but I'm super, super excited. With that being said, that is the video. It was a chunky boy, But I just really love these interviews with the developers where they go into what it takes to make these games, but also like what it's like to be a developer, especially someone like Hamaguchi, who is leading an entire team of hundreds of people to ensure that they can put out a great product. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I am Curious Corduroy. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.